Hello, welcome to my presentation on the brain structure and its role in behavior by me, Sarah Jane. I want to start off by talking about the relevance of brain structure to biopsychology with a little introduction. So first, knowing the how and the what of the brain structure, how everything works, how everything is formatted in the brain, will allow scientists to dive into the why. Why does this specific part of the brain affect this specific behavior, or what could be causing this behavior? So that's the foundational knowledge, which is key to understanding the psychology of specific animals. So say the structure of a mouse's brain is vastly different from that of a chimpanzee's. So looking at what parts of the brain that a mouse, say, doesn't have that a chimpanzee does have could give us some vital information to what behaviors are dependent upon different parts of the brain being wired a certain way. This just gives scientists a space to research connections or correlations between behavioral changes from a psychological standpoint. So next we've got some key concepts where the brain is made up of 3 sections and the lower regions control the more basic functions, and as you go further up the brain, up and towards the front, the regions get more complex, which we have evolved as a species to have more and more complex brains over time, which is fascinating, and we start out with the hindbrain. So the hindbrain contains the cerebellum, the medulla, the pons, and the brainstem. Starting out with the cerebellum, that's involved with balance, with motor coordination. Then we've got the medulla, which is responsible for helping with breathing and reflexes, which I'll talk about more in another slide. Then we've also got the pons, which deals with sleep and our state of arousal. And finally, the brainstem, which also deals with those same functions, but also controls heartbeat. Next, we've got the midbrain, which is a tiny little section of the brain that includes the reticular formation. And that's just a collection of neurons that also deals with sleep patterns and arousal and other patterns that we don't always have to think about, such as walking. Finally, we have the forebrain, which has a lot of parts, which starts with the limbic system, containing more specifically the amygdala and the hippocampus. Then we have the thalamus, basal ganglia, hypothalamus, and the cerebral cortex. To start with the amygdala, there is one in each hemisphere of the brain, and this part of the brain is responsible for something called our fight or flight response, which I will talk about more. But next we have the hippocampus, which is involved in the storage of memories. Close to that, we have the thalamus, which sits at the top of the brainstem and works as a very important relay station between other parts of the brain. Then we've got the basal ganglia, which is a large neuron cluster that works with the cerebellum to help coordinate movements. After that is the hypothalamus, which is located below the thalamus and monitors the pleasurable activities such as drinking, sex, and eating, and also deals with stress and reward responses. Finally, we have the cerebral cortex, which is the part of the brain responsible for our most complex mental functions, such as thinking and planning. So for key concepts part 2, we're going to talk about the 2 hemispheres of the brain, which are the left and the right. The left hemisphere is responsible for most of our language processing, and it also controls the right side of our body. For the right hemisphere, that controls our interpretation of stories and the intonation of people's voices, our perception of it, and it also controls the left side of our body. Now, it's a common misconception that some people are either left-brained or right-brained, which there is no scientific evidence to suggest this, and we use both hemispheres of our brain essentially equally. Next, we have the different lobes of the brain. There are 4, so there's parietal, temporal, occipital, and frontal. Starting with occipital, that deals with our eyesight, and so processing that visual stimuli. Then we have the temporal lobe, which is in the cerebral cortex, along with the frontal lobe. But the temporal lobe deals with hearing and language processing. Our temporal lobe also deals with memory as well. Next we have frontal, which is responsible for the controlling of our voluntary movements, as well as personality and intelligence. Lastly, we have the parietal lobes. This area is also responsible for motor controls, but more specifically with registering spatial location, and also deals with attention. Now I'd like to talk about some behaviors and theories with the structure of the brain. So first we have our fight or flight response, which is thanks to our amygdala, and it helps us survive if we are in a situation that could be potentially dangerous. So say you're walking out in the woods and you see a bear, your brain's response would either be to fight the bear or to run away, which is flight. Next we have reflexes, which are controlled by the spinal cord, and reflexes can be things like sneezing or jerking your hand away from a hot surface. But there's more complex reflexes that some only infants have, such as the Moro reflex, which is the startle reflex, or the rooting reflex, which is naturally wanting to breastfeed or turning their head. These are behaviors that we have adapted over time because they've served us in the past to help us survive. Thinking about both of these sections of behaviors, they both deal with something called Darwinism, and that is Charles Darwin's theory that the best fitted individuals will survive and reproduce. So now I'd like to talk about why this interests me. When I was younger, I found a YouTube channel called SBSK, which is Special Books by Special Kids, and it's run by Chris Ulmer, who interviews individuals with special needs. His passion ended up inspiring me to go down the path of wanting to work with special needs individuals. And one interview that I thought related really well to this project was one where he interviews someone with complete agenesis of the corpus callosum, which is absence of the corpus callosum. So I'm going to show you a couple clips now of what that interview looks like.
How do you want to introduce yourself to people who don't know you yet?
I'm Kevin. I have ACC, in which I don't have the middle part of my brain.
How do people react when you tell them you're missing a part of your brain?
They're like, there's no way you could survive. I'm like, obviously there is, because I'm sitting here today.
What are some of the complications it causes?
Short-term memory loss. Sometimes. You forget someone's name. You're hyper all the time.
After finding out about SBSK, I came across many more genetics documentaries. One of the documentaries was about a girl named Cameron who had to have a hemispherectomy due to her Rasmussen's encephalitis. This condition causes a chronic inflammation in the brain. It is a neurological disease that for Cameron causes aggressive drop seizures throughout the day and testing at a lower and lower cognitive level. After the procedure, she is able to live almost essentially a normal life, except for a hemiplegia, which is a stroke-like effect on the opposite side of her body that she had the hemispherectomy.
Back in North Carolina, 7 weeks have passed, and it's a big day for Cameron.
What's today?
School day!
Today is the first day of
School!
For her, she is adjusted to it just like she never had surgery.
You don't have to worry, Mommy.
Cameron will never regain full use of her left hand, but with time should learn to walk with ease, and her seizures have gone.
My hope for outcomes of future research on the brain and its behaviors is that information will improve accessibility, update knowledge for parents and the public, and improve the quality of life and opportunities for individuals with disabilities. And here are my sources. Thank you for watching my presentation.